welcome. My name is Melanie Naranjo. I'm the Chief People Officer at Ethena. We are a compliance training company. We do everything from harassment prevention and cybersecurity all the way to hotline and case management. And one of the reasons why we do these webinars every month is because we know from partnering closely with people leaders and from being a people leader myself that being in the people space can be lonely, can be tough, can be hard to have some conversations because they're so sensitive, so confidential in nature that we want to make sure that we're building community for you all to chat with each other, to chat with us. So please, please, please make friends in the comments, be active. This is where you're going to build your community. We have Peter on the call, who's always sharing a spreadsheet for anyone who wants to share their contact information and connect afterwards. I hope you get tons and tons out of this session. With that said, I'm so happy to be chatting with you all today about how to build high functioning teams and to be partnering with the very wonderful Janet Duliga, who's Chief Corporate Officer at Prada. Very exciting. I'm going to let you introduce yourself in a second, Janet. But one of the reasons that we were so excited about talking about this is because Janet and I were chatting about the workplace and how to have fun at work. And it really led to this really interesting conversation about effectiveness and partnership and EQ. And what we ended up turning it into was, yeah, it's all about building high functioning teams that work well together, cross functionally, right? And so really excited to dig deep here today. So with that said, Janet, before we go in and I give everyone the rules of how this works, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, I will try to get the topic of my doctoral dissertation into any conversation, and I forced it on Melanie, and now here I am. I would consider myself a scholar practitioner, which is a nice way of saying I really like thinking about research and also applying it, operationalizing it. And my background is in organizational learning and also employment law. So I kind of put those things together and have made a nice life for myself in human resources. And after working many years now in different retail organizations, you can see I'm at Prada in the Americas here. And I'm super grateful to be a part of this discussion. I can't wait to hear the questions that come and also just have a great dialogue with Melanie, who, as I'm getting to know her, is just delightful, knowledgeable, and super energetic on these topics. So let's go.
You are so lovely. And for the record, for anyone who's wondering, Jen and I met at an HR dinner. So all of you, when you're getting invites to go places, get out of the house, stop being a hermit. This is how you're going to make friends. So with that said, for anyone who is new to these webinars, we like to make it very interactive. So I will be asking questions in the comments. My ask to you is get ready, be interactive. But if you don't want to be called on, because I will call on people occasionally, put an asterisk next to your response. That way I know, hands off, don't call on you. I don't want the fear of being called on to be a deterrent to participating, okay? All right, so with that said, let's do a quick high-level agenda of what we're gonna cover today. Wow, first cat hair of the day, probably there are gonna be 20 more. We're gonna talk about how to spot early signs of friction within your team. We'll talk about collaboration of blockers, how to leverage EQ, and practical steps to build trust. And then at the end, of course, we'll have a little spotlight for Ethena, the company that I work for and love so much. And then we'll leave space for Q&A because you all sent in some spicy questions and I am so ready to dig in. With that said, let's get into it. Oh, I see you all in the comments putting your asterisk. I'm so sorry, I'm not going to remember who put an asterisk now. So the ask is when you answer. In your answer, put an asterisk next to your answer, and then that will tell me don't call on you. But thank you. I love that you all are paying attention. You're ready. You're like, don't call on me. I'm driving. I'm doing the dishes. I'm an introvert. I'm here for you. Love it. All right. So first one. In the comments, scale of 1 to 5, how much do you agree with the following statement? 5 being I super agree, couldn't agree more. 1 being, what are you talking about? Every team I've ever partnered with has been a perfect model of team effectiveness. So 5 is, I've never experienced politics in the workplace, never seen passive aggressive behavior, nothing. We're perfect. Okay, I don't know about you, Janet, but I'm not seeing any 5s. Are you any 5s?
I'm seeing some spiciness in there for sure.
Okay, so before I call on you all, Janet, I'm curious to know as you see these questions come in, and wow, there's a lot coming in. I hope that this is giving you all an outlet to vent for a second. How surprised are you by these responses? Were you expecting higher scores? Is this what you expected? Were you expecting more of a mixed bag?
I think the rarity is the team that's just like they get in and they can do it and it feels great. And everyone's like, man, I've never felt more effective with my colleagues in my life and I love them all. Like it's not, that's not realistic probably, but it certainly can be good and it can be good for some time. But I relate to what everybody's writing there. It can be rough.
I'm with you. I'm zero surprised. I remember at my last company thinking like things are fine, things are great. And then I came to Athena where we actually require and anybody can you give me a +1 in the comments if anybody has ever heard of Patrick Lencioni or Lencioni, I'm not sure how to pronounce it. Any fans of him? Okay, getting some here. At Athena, we have required reading for every new hire, and it's The Advantage by him, and it's all about effective organizations. And I remember reading through and being like, oh, here are the signs of like an ineffective organization. I was like, oh, we did that. We did that. We did that. Oh, uh-oh. And so, yeah, it can be really, it's what's fascinating to me is how quickly ineffective, political, passive aggressive behavior can become normalized and seen as like, well, there's nothing you can do about it. This is just the way work is. So let's find a way to work around it. And how quickly people stop trying to solution. So before we dig in, I always love to give some space to people in the audience. So let's call in a couple of people, maybe somebody who didn't put an asterisk. And if you forgot, I'm so sorry. Now's your time to shine. Let's do Jody Ann, JODI-ANN. You're going to get unmute access in a second. If you could go ahead and unmute yourself and tell us a little bit more about why your response to this one was a 1. I'm going to give it another second in case Ace is not able to find you. Jody Ann, JODI-ANN. And if we can't find you, no worries. We'll call on someone else. Okay, I'm gonna try one more person then because I think that one's not working. Let's do Melanie Martinez because we share the same name. Melanie Martinez, you give a 3 for this one. You were right in the middle. Tell me a little bit more about this. What had you right in the middle?
Hi, Melanie. Thanks for giving me an opportunity to share. I'm right in the middle because I've been in both sides. I have been in teams where we've maybe gone through a big reorg or change, and so that dysfunction just, through the roof. But then I've also been on teams where it's just a well-oiled machine, and you're like, wow, how do I copy, what everyone's doing and take it to the next place. So I've been on both ends of the spectrum, which is why I chose the middle.
Fair enough. And for the record, you are not alone here. We got a ton of questions in the registrations around how to maintain and build high functioning teams when you're doing a reorg, when you've just gone through a merger and acquisition, when all these changes are happening. I have a follow-up question for you, which is for the companies where you saw that it wasn't working particularly well, I'm curious to know what exactly were those behaviors that you saw that weren't working super well, and what was the impact that it had on the organization?
So specifically with change, the behavior, it could be, folks aren't comfortable with change because it could show up in a couple of ways. Passive aggressive behavior because they just don't want to get on board with what's happening. Those high flyers that don't want to wait for the other people to get on board and they're just moving and then like, too bad, I'm leaving you behind. Um, and then what was the second part of your question? I'm sorry.
Follow-up is what's the impact? Is it like no big deal,
Oh,
it's fine, or
no.
does it cause issues?
Oh yeah, it's huge issues. You can't, it's hurting cats. You have to spend more time getting people on the same page and get them in the boat and rowing in the same direction than getting actual work done. So it's such a productivity suck.
Such a productivity suck, which by the way, what a great way to phrase that. Because I find that sometimes where things get lost in translation between HR and the business, even though HR is part of the business, is we'll use words like engagement is down or morale is down. And the business team will hear that as like a nice to have, like you're wasting my time. But when you talk about drops in productivity, that's loss of profit. That's loss of revenue. And so that's actually really critical. Melanie, thank you so much for sharing. Let's all give Melanie some love in the comments. Everyone give her a little heart. Janet, I'm curious to know what goes through your mind having heard Melanie's contributions here. Are you surprised at the idea that this is negatively impacting the business?
No, and I think even as I've become more experienced over time, I think what she's saying, it's so clear upfront from any change, any program implementation, when two teams who don't normally collaborate have to collaborate, like the time not spent upfront getting that sorted out as best you can, or laying some groundwork for trust and the foundation there. Yeah, it expands exponentially into dysfunction. It's not great. But I loved what she said too, though, because when you're on one of those teams, it feels so special when you're on a good team that is functioning well, not perfectly, but well. There's nothing like it. It's really, really fun.
It really is so powerful. I actually love that you sort of alluded to, hey, these things they creep up over time, right? I would love to dig in there. A lot of times, by the time we're talking about this, it's already this huge snowball effect.
Yeah.
You know, it feels impossible to change.
Mhm.
I want to dial it back for a second. What are some of the early signs of friction that leaders often miss or actively ignore that end up costing teams down the line and leading to these much bigger culture-wide issues?
Well, for me, I think I'm looking at body language
Mm.
from the get-go, and man, you can see so much, even on video conferencing, if you're remote and it's Zooms. I mean, especially in the room. I think when you have a lot of people who are raising objections before someone's even got through their deck to describe what the new program will be, or the different change or something, can't listen, have to, derail things. I think that is a sign. And then I think even a little further down, maybe once things are rolling and something isn't, the change isn't accepted, maybe is you're seeing these sidebars, and sometimes it's the leader of that change, or the big leader of the company is having these, people kind of coming to them about it on the side, but also in the meeting itself sidebars are going on, and that's disruptive. It shows like kind of lack of respect at times. And yeah, so I mean, there's so many things, and I, put it all in the bucket of like observing that emotional data, the emotional intelligence cap that you're wearing. It's data that you're reading to show discontent, not alignment and things like that.
Think that's exactly right. And what it surfaces for me is I think it comes down to how decisions are made at a company. I always look at,
Yes.
right, like who was involved, what questions were asked, how many people were talking? If people weren't talking, were you proactively soliciting other people's perspectives, or did you just make that decision and you actually don't know how other people are feeling on the call? One of the things that we've started doing at Ethena in our leadership team meetings is we kick off every call with a pulse check question. So like, let's say we're talking about, I don't know, let's make something up. We think that we should be focusing on building trainings around birds. On a scale of 1 to 5, who here is in alignment that this is a good use of time? And so we'll get people who say like 5, good use of time, 1, 2, and then we'll be like, why? Oh, okay. I guess we need to have some more discussions then, or let me try and build buy-in, or maybe we should pivot the discussion. It's been a really great way to make sure like, hey, before we even start, are we on the same page? But you, Janet, you seem to like really resonate with that when I said like how decisions are made. Was there anything you wanted to add to that?
Well, I think going back to what you said about, the work of Patrick Lencioni, and I think it has everything to do with, do people know, if you're talking about a team and not necessarily on like a project or something, but like, how does that team function together? Do they know, who owns what decision? And if not, then, is everyone comfortable with that, the gray spaces or not? And I think decision rights are often something that people may not raise up specifically, but that's kind of where a lot of the friction can be around.
There's this term, I don't know if you're aware, maybe you are. It's have you heard of the Netflix coined term, informed captain?
Mm-mm.
It's this idea that there's a decision maker for every project, and it's the IC, the informed captain's job to farm for dissent. But at the end of the day,
Mhm.
it is their decision. And part of their job is make the decision after having collected information and explain why you've chosen to go in your direction, even in spite of the feedback that you've received. And it's your job to own the risk, but it's also your job to own the reward if you deviate from what's being recommended. And I agree with you that I think that helps solve so many problems because I have seen so much time wasted on people fighting battles that are not their battle to fight. It's what we want from you is your feedback, not your decision, right? Right, your feedback, but I'm going to make the decision and you have to respect that I might make a decision that is not what you are recommending because I have been tasked with the decision. I'm the expert, blah, blah, blah. I'm curious to know if there are any other things that come to mind for you in terms of decision making, conflict, what leads to people talking behind each other's backs instead of having those direct feedback conversations.
Well, I think it's a bit of the cultural kind of thing too, where if it's tolerated, it will continue. And I feel like there have been times in my life where the I say probably 8 times a day, did you talk to that person about that? Did did you have a discussion directly? And it's kind of basic, but it is powerful and it's important. And sometimes you can facilitate those discussions too. Like, we should probably get in a room together and talk about this because it really is bothering you, I can tell. And I think it's not, I wouldn't call it like a calling someone out. Like, I don't mean to be aggressive or conflict seeking, but it can, raise the issue up and then the conflict can potentially be resolved or at least admitted and identified.
1000%. I don't think it's conflict seeking at all. There's actually, I can't remember who it was that said, like, when somebody tells them something that they should have said to somebody else instead, they always respond with, "Oh, that's fascinating. And how did they respond when you gave them that feedback?" And then it forces the person to be like, "Well, I haven't
Ugh.
shared," right? And it's sort of like, "Oh, well, why haven't you shared? Let's talk through that. Like, what's holding you back? Like, what feels scary?" And even like putting them in the position of the other person's shoes, right? Like, how would you feel if that person was sitting on feedback? Like, would you want them to sit on it? Would you want them to share it with you? How would you want them to share it with you? I think tends to help, maybe make it a little bit more human, and less political. With that said, we've talked about a couple of big blockers, and some of these are sort of like, saying things behind people's back, not giving the right feedback, not making decisions in a really inclusive way. And for me, when I really think about the biggest blockers or challenges to collaboration, it sort of comes down to three things for me. Curious to know if you have a different set of things. Really like a lack of clarity. So as we were talking about, right? Process, who's a decision maker? Like, is this a priority? Is this worth discussing? Why have we spent 3 days talking about this unless it's very important? The second is a sense of favoritism or biased decision making. So, when that person's thing gets approved, I don't believe that it's because it was a smart decision. I believe that they just get preferential treatment. And when I speak, you don't listen to me, which for the record, sometimes true, sometimes not true, right? Sometimes it's
Yes.
you weren't as persuasive, and so it's worth exploring. And three, maybe tied into this a little bit, is a lack of curiosity, whether I'm not curious to know why you disagreed with me. I'm just assuming that it's because you like this person more, or it's a lack of curiosity of others' opinions. I'm just making a decision and I'm not looking to get pushback. And tied into that lack of curiosity, comes with it a lack of psychological safety. I'm not going to speak up because I know that you don't care about my opinion. What goes through your mind when I say that? Do you have other ones that I'm not mentioning? What are you thinking?
Well, I think it might be like the other side of the of a similar coin when you said psychological safety. I think um, one of my favorite things to think about is in a company culture, it really blossoms, and this is a concept by Edgar Schein, from the way the founders, we'll call them founders, whoever, um, rewarded or punished behavior in a sense, or disincentivized things. So if one thing gets rewarded, I think that people tend to do that. And then if things get, if there's a punitive side, or if you speak up and it gets shot down brutally, or you're embarrassed or humiliated or whatever, by disagreeing with a particular person or in a particular way, whatever, I think all of those things set up how the company collaborates. And I personally think it's very helpful to have a collaboration model for teams, and or some type of framework. It doesn't have to be some, very elaborate way, but if the team and then the company potentially could get on board with a model or a framework, that really helps kind of even out the playing field quite a bit. And then you have, terminology that can help. But I do think culturally collaboration can be rewarded and modeled and celebrated. And if the leaders celebrate good collaboration, or even if they can see a tiny piece of good teamwork, and then they celebrate it, that sets the stage for the next one and the next one and the next one.
I would love to dig in there. What is, not to put you on the spot, but what's like the most basic version of a collaboration model? Like, what does it entail?
Well, I think, you know, I've looked at a couple different, like maybe they weren't intended to be collaboration models, but I've used them as like frameworks. So I think if you look at, for example, there's a a book by David Rock called Neuro Leadership or something like that, and but he's written a bit about like a psychological safety model in a sense. He calls
Okay.
it something different than that.
Right.
And I think if everyone kind of understands like the impact you have on other people by your behavior, vice versa, that can be a good starting place. And I think, again, the Lencioni
Yeah.
body of work can really be helpful. It's just having some things that people can hang on to. It's like, what is it to scope out a problem? Let's define that. Let's agree as a company, like, what is that? So then when there are problems, we're scoping them. And then I just think like you kind of piece by piece can build up some of the tools. And then you obviously have to have buy-in, that it works, that it's relevant. And I think that's a bit of a trick sometimes too, because there are times when, executives or leaders maybe don't, they want to do things, they love a top-down model because it suits them, and they don't know how to celebrate the collaboration. But I think looking up some different ways to be collaborative, even there's a couple great books on like how to have great conversations. Those
Yeah.
can be kind of expanded into how do we have, great conversations as groups beyond just like, two people having, harder conversations or deep conversations.
That makes me think of two things that we've implemented at Athena that have been working really well for us, I have to say. So for anybody, I see in the comments some people are asking for like some specific examples. Um, One is for at Athena, any decisions that we are making that are cross-functional, we are required to send a pre-read in advance. So it's basically like a memo where you say, here's the problem statement, here's what we're trying to achieve. And here's the proposal that I have to achieve to solve for that. And then you send it to anybody who could be impacted or should weigh in. And you send clear instructions, which are please weigh in the comments by end of day Tuesday. And then I will circle back with my final decision and thought process as to why, on X date. If you want to have a voice in this, you have to meet the deadline. And what's great about that is it really solves for different like thinking preferences and inclusivity and psychological safety because everyone's able to get their thoughts out versus like in a live meeting, people are talking over each other. Maybe one person needs more time to process, so they don't have thoughts till later. So then they feel like it's too late to contribute. And then you can't
Yeah.
really pay attention to all the thoughts. It's just like the loudest voice in the room. And so this really allows the decision maker to see everything at a glance and address one-off things in comments. We use Google Docs, and then Sometimes where there's like a deeper, more complex issue, they will schedule small group follow-ups to work out those things live. Like, hey, you two are bringing up the same thing. I want to dig in deeper with you live. And then they just circle back and they make a decision. And it's just agreed upon at Athena that once a decision maker makes a decision, you must respect that decision, disagree and commit. And afterwards, if a mistake, if it was the wrong decision, we'll debrief and learn why. But it's not a finger pointing thing. It's a let's understand what went wrong so we as a team can move forward effectively moving forward. And we encourage risk taking. We don't want people to feel scared to take risks. So again, that's why it's not about finger pointing or blaming. It's really an intellectual exercise about what we can learn from this experiment. And the second thing, to your point, Janet, about how to have conversations with each other and how to partner with each other more effectively, we have what's called a user manual at Athena that all new hires are required to fill out. You're smiling, so maybe you
No,
recognize.
it sounds great. I love it.
Oh, yeah. So it asks like a couple of questions like, what's something that people often misunderstand about me, or what are the things that really motivate me at work? And one of my favorite questions to ask is actually, what's your conflict style? And the reason I like this so much is because I have found that it opens the room to assuming good intent and facing tough conversations more comfortably. So, for example, my conflict style is problem solving, which sounds good, but it really isn't. In some ways, because what I'll do is I'll interrogate. I'll ask you question after question after question, and the person at a certain point feels like I'm just trying to prove them wrong. I don't actually care about what they think. I'm just trying to ask questions to prove my point, but I'm actually curious. Like, I'm trying to solve the problem. I want to make sure we're solving the right problem. And so now that people know my conflict style, when I get into that zone, people are able to say, okay, I hear you, Melanie. I want to press pause. I see that you're leaning into your problem solving conflict style, and I know why you do that. And I think it makes perfect sense. And also, here's where it's blocking me. Can we take a step back? And the same is true for like avoidant conflict styles, right? Like, give me a +1 in the comments if you have any people on your team who maybe just solve the problem by avoiding it, not talking about it. And you can say, like, hey, I see that you're defaulting into your avoidant conflict style. I know why you're doing this, right? Because part of the answer should be, here's why I do it. It's because I'm scared. I'm trying to solve
Right.
it. I understand why you're doing it. And also I think it's blocking us from getting to the solution. So let's pull back for a second. And it just helps us have these more open human conversations versus, I'm so annoyed. You won't just face the problem. Why do you keep avoiding it? So anyway, I'll pause. Janet, I see you sort of like nodding along.
No, I mean,
Yeah, what's
super amazing to have the user manual. Did you call it
yeah,
user?
user
Yeah.
manual. That's what we call it. And it's gonna
One
have
thing I had been thinking about was it can be helpful. It's not really a collaboration model per se, but to do like new leader assimilations. And those are, you know, different companies have different ways of doing that. But I think it is a way to, when you have a change in an organization to kind of get the leader up to speed, those can be great places, to kind of build in a little bit of like, how are we going to work together? So I really appreciate that you have that right up front. And again, a lot of what you're dealing with in obstacles to collaboration is emotional. And so emotional intelligence, anything that's raising the game of the emotional intelligence of all the parties, I think is relevant to getting that team to connect, to feel safer because, they're kind of exposing themselves a bit more, et cetera.
Oh, I love that. And also, I see some people in the comments asking,
Yeah.
yeah, oh, yes, we will share templates in our follow-up emails, so keep an eye out. Okay, so Janet, I'd love to get into some specifics because I know that we were chatting about, yeah, we've both had to go through this and throughout our careers. I'm curious to know if you could share an example of a time when you were able to effectively address one of these collaboration breakdowns, whether it was due to lack of clarity, a sense of favoritism, lack of psychological safety. Walk us through this.
Yeah, there's so many examples. And I think one of my favored methods is to support a leader by really breaking it down with them individually first in a safer way if
Yeah.
I think that they're kind of a bit of the obstacle. And I think that a lot of what I do and what I think is, for me personally, I think that language, you know, matters, and keeping people from feeling defensive
Yeah.
can be extremely helpful. So whether it's in the group setting where you really don't ever want to put someone in a defensive place if you can help it. Because it just like it takes all the drama, like into that moment instead of like about the project and whatever. But I think having phrases that or practice that can move things forward without accusing
Yeah.
or without kind of calling someone out. And I think, it's very simple, but saying things like, I noticed that we're really stuck on this. And then kind of like going from there, or and I love saying I notice anything, because it is just it's not about, you did this or I feel this way or whatever. It's I notice, here we are again on the same topic, or here we are again having this argument once again, if we're talking about an obstacle.
Yeah.
And just in general on functionality, um, I think yeah, I mean, I think I do prefer a one-on-one where I can go deep with somebody and kind of tear something back and let them, have an opportunity for an insight, so
Yeah.
then they can own the solution themselves. I always say, like, I can't learn anything for you. Like, I can't learn for someone else. It has to be your own insight. So it can't be about me giving advice or telling them what I see specifically. It's really about, like, did I create a space for them to kind of self-identify something?
Yeah, I love that. I love in HRBP meetings, I'll often say, because understandably there can be friction sometimes between HR and the stakeholder or the business stakeholder. I'll often say, hey, like, I get the impression that this isn't landing well, or I have the sense that this is causing some stress and frustration.
Yes.
Help me understand what about it is causing stress. How can I help you? How can we bring down that stress? And I find that it helps people feel more comfortable to say the thing that they're sitting on, right? Because maybe they feel like you're not open or you're steamrolling them. And this really opens the door to that. I'll share something at Athena that happened to us like way early on. Was from a cross-functional perspective, our product and our commercial side weren't always necessarily talking to each other in the ways that they should. And there were some things that were not being said that should have been said, and things that were getting missed because we weren't having these conversations. And by the time we clocked it, it had sort of gotten a little bit emotional. It was no longer like an intellectual thing. It was now people are frustrated, people feel hurt, people feel wronged. And so what we ended up doing was at our next leadership offsite, a few days before, I had people answer 3 questions, two of which are relevant to this, which is what's something that people often don't know or understand or get wrong about my job? And what's the hardest part about my job? And then we had everyone review it beforehand. So you had to read everybody's answers beforehand so that we could come prepared. And then we just engaged in a discussion that wasn't like, hey, you all are angry at each other, let's talk about it. It was scale of 1 to 5, who here was surprised by something that they read? And then it opened the door to, oh, you were surprised. Yeah, I didn't realize how hard it is on the sales team when we make a decision that it's not just impacting like the business, it's impacting the take home money that they get, because this might lead to, making it harder to make a sale, harder to hit quota. It feels more closely tied to their livelihood versus a generic business decision. Or, hey, I actually didn't realize that that was a challenge that you all were facing. Had I known that, I wouldn't have put so much pressure on you for this thing. I actually think I can help you on this. Let's partner on this because I want to make your life easier. I didn't realize you were struggling so much. And so it just really, I have found that the solution often is deeper rooted. It's often, right, like somebody struggling with bandwidth, or somebody just like fundamentally misunderstands the other person's perspective. And by just opening it up to a broader discussion and making it human and building that empathy, like true empathy in the true sense of the word, like, do I understand what it feels like to be you? Goes a long way to solving these problems. Before I move on, any other thoughts that you want to add? I see some things going on in the comments.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that people will always say is, like, you have to provide a why. And a bit of what you're saying is, like, it doesn't have to be necessarily a meta why of, like, why are we doing this, new system in the company, or, whatever. It could be like a very personal one, but there are layers of those whys, I think. And even, fairly recently, I've dealt with a situation where, a large group of people is being asked to do a lot of like technical kind of manual data entry kind of work. So it's kind of like things that used to be in a finance are now in a, spread out, and no one likes it. No one's doing it. And so you have to find a reason why are we doing this? Like, what is going on? Like, did finance get tired, or is it, is there a bigger reason? And so the more you can explain and talk people through like why it's better for everyone, for the group, for the company, for the, organization, the team, it's super helpful. But sometimes people just start down a path of any project, big or small, without a true explanation as to how it fits together to the betterment of, the top line, the revenue, or, the people.
Yeah, I think it's very well worded. It's just this idea that we need to think bigger. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm curious to know before we pivot on this one, I want to take the thread just one step further. That's a mixed metaphor. I don't know what I was trying to say. I want to go one step deeper and explore, this idea of EQ. I think fundamentally, all of us in the HR space, we're bought in. EQ is important. What's harder is getting other people bought into this and getting them to adopt it, whether that be the leadership team, whether that be managers. How can we drive an equal level of EQ across the entire company and not just within the HR teams?
That's, I think that has to be a passion of someone's, to like, take that on a bit. But I like to remind people that it's EQ for a reason, not, gushy mushy soft stuff. It's called EQ. And then, just having educating probably the HR team around what are we even talking about? Well, there is emotional data that can be collected, and it's not all qualitative, it's quantitative. It's, there's so much science behind what EQ does. It is using emotional data to make better decisions. It's it's a complement to IQ, which is, your cognitive abilities to, to reason and use critical thinking through a decision. And as many of you probably know, I mean, we make emotional decisions before we're making it, intellectual, cognitive decisions a lot of the time on the same topic. So I think having some science, in the arsenal of the people who are, in a sense, responsible, I think layering it into your processes such as performance management and, talent calibrations, because you will have people say things like this person does or doesn't have EQ. This person has, a presence. They're kind of like these, maybe some softer skills. What if you were to put a little more emotional intelligence around how we talk about talent and how we talk about team leadership and things like that? So that's where I probably strike the hardest when I want to spread EQ language and just generally the use of emotional intelligence.
I love that concept of emotion as data. I talk to a lot of people who get understandably frustrated when they're in an HRBP conversation with a stakeholder and the stakeholder is coming in at like an 11 and they're angry and they're stressed and this and that. And that can be quite frustrating because it can feel understandably like we are now having to shoulder the burden of their emotions. In fact, can I get a +1 in the comments if anybody ever feels like you as HR have to be like super neutral and can never show emotions? Yeah, and everybody else gets to be emotional.
One.
Yeah, it's like why? And let's not even talk about the gender component because so many of us are women and women of color in the HR field. And so even so more so, we don't want to show emotion because it will be seen as, I don't know, hysterical. And so I have actually found that I really value when someone comes in with emotion because that's data for me, right? If I didn't know that
Yes.
you were upset, I wouldn't have known that this was a thing that we need to dig into. And so now I can ask the question, I'm having the impression that, this is quite causing a lot of stress and upset. Help me understand why. oh, your team, your sales team is really struggling right now because it's end of quarter and I'm asking you to do performance reviews and you don't have time for this. And it feels like I am not valuing your time. And also, quite frankly, I'm misunderstanding like a fundamental part of the sales structure and cycle. Thank you for telling me, let's talk about that. Let's solve for that. Or even, hey, because you did not have the EQ to pick up that there are people on your team who don't feel comfortable speaking up unless you proactively ask them or create a spreadsheet or a Google Doc where they can comment async,
Right.
which is for anyone who doesn't know that term, like in their own time, not live on the call, you just missed out on some really great contributions and opportunities because that person didn't feel comfortable speaking up. So your EQ isn't their problem. It's now your problem because you made I always say my job as an HR person isn't to make decisions or force people to make decisions. It's to empower people to make the most well-informed decisions possible. And you just made an uninformed decision because you did not do the job of properly farming for dissent. And so I completely agree with you on the EQ as data piece of things. It looked like you maybe wanted to say something. So before I move on, I didn't want to cut you off, or are you good?
No, I was probably just agreeing very
Yeah,
vehemently.
yeah, love it, love it. Always here for some agreement. And I love the excitement in the comments too. All thank you. This helps me feel like we are not talking into the ether. So thank you so much. Keep
Oh,
it
I
going.
did think of one thing
Yeah,
someone said recently that I thought was funny, but also really useful is, like I was saying, I like to say like I notice, and you were saying I observe,
yeah, yeah.
but they had said something like, I notice you seem energetic. And it wasn't like really labeling like
Yeah.
but it was like some type of emotion was there. And I thought it was pretty funny. And in the right space, I think it could be useful because then the
Uh,
person can be like, oh yeah, I'm energetic, I'm angry, I'm happy, I'm passionate, I'm whatever I am.
yeah. Oh, I love that. It actually makes me think, I imagine since we were talking about like how do we get other people across the company to adopt this,
Mm,
I imagine that part of the issue is some people just don't have the right language or the right
yes.
systems to do it. So one thing I'm a big fan of doing, and over time you won't need to do this anymore, but as you're building this muscle across your teams, one thing I do is I always have a manager Slack channel at whatever company I work for. And once a week, and I just do this at the start of the quarter, so I schedule them all in advance rather than having to remember every week. I just schedule an EQ question at the start of each week that I recommend. I don't force it. I recommend managers to consider asking this question at their next one-on-one. And so it'll be questions like scale of 1 to 5, how motivated are you when you dial into work every day? And what would it take to get that score half a point higher? Or, scale of 1 to 5, what is your stress level right now? And what is the biggest cause of that? And what I have found is the less you force it on people, the more likely they are to give it a try. And once they see it in action, they start to realize like, oh, that actually was a powerful question to ask. And I got a lot of helpful information. And so I would say, as you're building this muscle with your team, just feed it to them as opposed to expecting them to remember. They're not going to remember. So how do you work with them versus at odds with them to empower them to do the thing you're trying to enable them to do? Okay, we have time for just one more question before I pivot to our Athena spotlight and some audience Q&A. And so what I will ask for you is, I'm going to ask this one, our second to last one, just so you know, Janet, because I don't think we've really touched on this, and I imagine some people were curious to hear about this on this webinar. How can we ensure that we're identifying and properly leveraging unique strengths across the company? What are some specific resources or processes that you've leaned on successfully?
So I don't necessarily agree with like assessments that are not very scientific. But I do think in different ways, like surveys, or I'll call it an assessment, but maybe it's a little bit lighter than that, where people can identify like different ways of thinking, different ways of learning, even EQ kinds of questions. So, like any instrument like that, I think, in the right hands, to guide like the discussion and conversation can be really helpful because it provides a different slice through the day to day of how people solve problems, how people learn, how people, how much they like to interact with others and in what way. I think those can be super helpful. For example, you might learn that you have of a team of 10, 8 people are super analytical And, two, the people are much more maybe intuitive, or like they think in a different kind of manner, holistic kind of, I don't know what other way. Or you have like logic versus people who are more about the heart. And I'm not saying you want to divide people and label everybody, because I really don't like that. And I don't like how it can get used as a weapon later. It's like, well, I'm a, red personality. So that means, this is how I'm going to react, and you just have to deal with it. And I don't appreciate that. But I do think some of these things in the right context can be really, really helpful. And again, it's just kind of some interesting data, and maybe the reminder is that qualitative data, it's still, you can analyze it. You can say, okay, there's 5 of these things that we observed. Maybe we couldn't measure them exactly with an instrument. So I find those things can help people. And I think there are many books and tools and conversations you can have. Maybe I'm thinking of positive psychology, where it's really not about diagnosing, symptoms of pathology. Positive psychology is about when are humans at their best, what conditions create resourcefulness. And, there's a lot of great work out there on those kinds of things. But in HR, I think what we talk about is potential. And anything you can read and understand about human potential is a way for you to see someone, and see their strengths for what they are, and really celebrate those. There's that expression, I think it's from Mark Twain, maybe, where he says something about, I can live off of a good compliment for 2 weeks or something. Someone can correct me in the comments, but it's the thing is like appreciating someone and seeing their strengths. It's worth taking the time to do it. And if you can layer that into your talent processes and some of the HR processes and programs, and how you talk about people and celebrate your people, the better.
Yeah, there are two things that brings to mind for me that I like leveraging in terms of strengths. One is I actually just like to ask people directly if anybody's ever heard of the SWAT analysis. So it's strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And so you just have people on their own label what they think their strengths are, what they think their weaknesses are, what they think their opportunities are, right? What is your level up opportunity? What's something we're not doing on the team that like you could be stepping into? And then what are threats? What's holding you back? Because I find that first of all, sometimes managers, I think, get in their head too much thinking I have to have all the answers when sometimes the right answer is just ask. And two, I find that it puts your direct report in a more autonomous agency seeking position where, hey, you need to be in charge of your own success and you need to be in charge, right? You need to be in charge of managing up and making sure that I'm aware of your strengths, right? I can't read your mind. I can't proactively know these things. So that's one that I like doing. And then the other that I really like doing is, as I've sort of alluded to throughout this call, being really curious as you roll things out and creating space for as many people as possible to give input, because I've learned, like I've been so surprised by input that I get from people who are not even on that team or have never done this thing before, but they just think in a way that I don't think or that other people on the team aren't thinking. And so they're like catching these things that, otherwise would have been missed. I noticed this in particular in the difference between like very senior people and very junior people. Senior people, I think sometimes we get lost in the strategy sauce and we can lose like what it feels like from the employee perspective. Like that's unclear to me. You have all this context. I didn't have this context, or like, here's how it's going to impact me in my day-to-day life. So I found just like the more input you can get from the more people, the more that you will be able to observe like, oh, that person always thinks in that way. I'm going to call on them. And actually it's kind of reminds me of one last thing, which is we like to just give people projects that they've never done before. And it's kind of like a sink or swim thing, but with like a little bit more love. But it just allows us to see like, what can you do if forced to stretch? And some things people hate and they're like, don't want to do that again. Okay, good to know. And then other things are like, that's amazing. Like, how do I do more? If there's more to take, please give it to me. I'm looking at the time. I'm going to quickly shift us into a quick 3-minute spotlight on Athena, and then I promise we will do Q&A. I'm going to screen share now. Oh, and also Ace, feel free to put up the poll at some point in the next few seconds. As I mentioned, we are Athena. We do compliance training. And one of the things that we're really passionate about is acknowledging that compliance isn't necessarily the reason you get up in the morning. It's not sort of the reason that people joined HR wasn't their passion, but it is really important. And so how do we stay compliant without taking up too much time and in a way that actually resonates with employees that they retain the data? But again, we're taking up as little time as possible because no one wants to spend hours and hours chasing employees to take their training or hours and hours running reports. So with that said, we have a test out tool. Why make your employees take a training if they can prove that they already know the information? If you have, leadership teams, your CEO who's complaining about all this training time and hours that are being spent taking training instead of producing revenue, what you could do is use our test out function. So you come up with a list of questions, and if your employees can answer them correctly and get a certain score, guess what? Automatically opted out. They don't have to take the training. If they fail, they have to take the training. And then you can explain when your CEO asks, why did they take up so much time doing training? It's because they didn't know that, you're not supposed to touch someone's butt at work. So now they know. Glad we gave them that training. And you can also then run reports that show through your testing out function, here's how much training time we saved with Athena. We gained 100 hours of revenue producing hours and effectiveness by optimizing and using Athena's test out tool. We also have AI translations. We know this is really big for our global customers, and they are loving this. You can, both with our trainings and your own trainings that you upload into Athena, in minutes, let me not say seconds, in minutes, you can translate into whatever language you want. So if you create a training that's onboarding training, but you don't speak Spanish, Portuguese, Italian, Chinese, in minutes, you can use our AI tool to auto-translate your training that you have created or that we have created and make it accessible to everyone across your company. We also have content customization. And when I say customization, I really mean customization. We have all of our courses have an animated portion. And so you can literally change the avatar. You can say, I want them to be wearing a business suit because that's our vibe at our company. Actually, no, we're more casual. I want them to be wearing jeans and a t-shirt. I want the background to be less corporate. I want the background to look like a home environment. You can fully customize our content to better match your culture and your needs. You can also create your own content within our app. So if you want to create from scratch, or if you want to take our content, but you want to add, policy attestation so that you're not separately taking training and having them sign an acknowledgement form that they have taken the training or that they understand your code of conduct, you can do that with us. Or if you want to go one level further, you can even have custom training from scratch. So you can literally send us a script and we will shoot a video for you and create the training from scratch. It is whatever you want, completely bespoke. Okay. With that said, I promised, look, 3 minutes. I was so good at this. For anybody who tuned in for HRCI or Shrimp credits, you can grab those now. Please keep a lookout for the follow-up email from us, which will have all those resources that we mentioned, as well as a special discount if you are interested in exploring Athena for your compliance training and maybe having your CEO complain a little bit less about how much time your employees are spending on their training. Okay, with that said, I'm going to leave this up for a few seconds while we do Q&A. We got a few questions come into us. All right, Janet, are you ready for some of these? Because
let's go.
Some of them are pretty spicy. Okay. Can you discuss tips or ideas for when just one or two of your leaders are refusing or just inadvertently not providing or fostering a supportive environment?
I mean, for me personally, I think, again, kind of going back to what I said before, I would probably get someone that they listen to talk to them about it from, HR or another leader, because for sure everyone has noticed. And I think that's another thing to keep in mind that isn't so obvious all the time, but like people, most everyone already knows if there's a problem, like people can observe it. But I think keeping the conversation somewhat private so they can react appropriately, I think, and kind of be real about it. But I think you have to say directly those words. It's like, I noticed this, or let's talk about why this is so challenging, What's going on?
Uh, yeah, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I think I'm kind of a head-on kind of person in that regard, but
I'm with you, direct all the way. Okay, we have one that has a bunch of upvotes actually, so I'm going to ask this one. I'd love to hear your thoughts on how to maintain high functioning team dynamics during periods of company restructuring or big change, like we were talking early on, maybe merger and acquisition, and how to intentionally use those transitions as opportunities to reinforce or even enhance team strengths.
Um, I think one of the most basic elements of change management is like spending time communicating what you don't know, but when you think you'll know it. And I keep in mind the saying, leaders want to be in the know.
Mm,
And I know that like doesn't sound like a saying, but it's literally a saying. And I think you have to keep informing people and just kind of keeping the topic something that you can all talk about, not drowning in it, but when change is happening, we all know it's happening. Let's just like say it out loud. Let's kind of talk about, are we feeling fearful or not feel fearful? And this is what I know so far. So let's just kind of keep going, doing great work. And um, you have to manage your own anxiety and concerns about it as well, because that is super contagious.
yeah.
So however you do that as a leader, I think is really critical.
It makes me think of a couple of things that we've leveraged at Athena during some of these, during big changes, all that stuff. One is we're always very proactive about sharing our why and our thought process. We're making this decision. Here's why. Here's what happens if we don't make this decision. Here's the risk, right? Here's what happens if we do make this decision. Like still risk, but smaller risk. Tough, but less tough. Better, right? And so helping bring people along the journey so that they don't feel like things are happening to them, but rather things are happening with them, right?
Mhm.
The other is openly soliciting solution-oriented contributions. So we're very big on like, don't bring problems to the table and complaints, bring solutions. And so we always encourage people, hey, we realize we're just, I don't know, 8 people on this leadership team, and we've got a whole team of people with other thoughts and perspectives. Here's our why. If you can poke holes in it, or if you have ideas that you would like for us to consider, we're very clear about setting expectation. We're considering it, can't promise anything. Please share with us what you think could be a better alternative. And we always try to ask it in a question that's like, if you were the CEO having to balance these different needs, what decision would you make versus like, what do you want? Because of course, any employee, I want like $1 million, but if I was a CEO, I'd probably not give everyone $1 million because the business would go out of business. And then the last thing that we tend to try and do about in terms of trying to like really reinforce and enhance our team strengths and all that is really being super loud about the things that have gone well and being proud of it, right? Like,
Mm.
thank you for the things that you have done that have helped us get to this point where we can now make this thoughtful decision. Thank you for creating a culture where we can openly engage in dialogue with you because we know that you are going to handle it with professionalism and thoughtfulness and assumption of good intent so that we can engage in a productive solution-oriented dialogue. So really reinforcing positive behavior. We are at time. I want to be respectful for anyone who has to run off to a meeting. So Janet, I want to thank you so much for hopping on this call with us.
Yeah.
It's been so much fun. I loved learning about your thinking, your experience, how you have done things throughout your career. Any final words to share with the audience before we head off for the rest of the day?
No, this is a great opportunity, and I appreciate having the chance to speak with you and to speak with everyone, and I'm just really, really honored and thank you.
Thank you. All right, oh, look at all the hearts. Thank you so much, everyone, and have a great rest of your Wednesday.